Fire the Blood-Red Commander, Igris's backstory. Before he was a knight of crimson armor, feared across dungeons as the Blood-Red Commander, he was a man of flesh and blood, with dreams and burdens like any other. His tale did not begin in a fortress or palace, but in a village of soil and hunger. Igris was born as Aelius Igris, the son of poor farmers who bent their backs under the weight of endless taxation. His earliest memories were not of laughter, but of the weary groans of his parents, their calloused hands sowing seed in fields that yielded little. Raiders often swept through, leaving only ashes and silence. It was in such a raid, when he was no more than 10, that Igris first revealed the iron within him. Armed with nothing but a wooden stick, he stood before his cowering family when brigands stormed their hut. The men laughed at the boy's trembling stance, but he did not lower the stick. He struck wildly, clumsily, but with such desperation that one raider staggered back, surprised. His bravery bought his family enough time to flee. That night the raiders left him broken in the dirt, but not dead. And it was then that fate intervened. A wandering knight, Sir Callan, found him bloodied but unbowed. The knight saw in the boy's eyes something rare, defiance that no fear could extinguish. He took the boy as his squire against all reason, against the protests of villagers who thought the child cursed. Training was brutal. Igris's hands blistered, his muscles ached, and more often than not he collapsed in exhaustion. Yet every dawn he rose again. His wooden stick became an iron practice sword, his body hardened, his will sharpened. Years passed, and the boy who once stood trembling against raiders grew into a young warrior whose strikes were precise and unyielding. His weapon of choice became the greatsword, a massive blade that most men could not lift. In his grip, it was not a burden but an extension of his will. By the time he earned his knighthood, he had already seen death on battlefields. His first war was a nightmare of mud and blood, where comrades fell like wheat before the scythe. Igris fought as though the world itself depended on his survival. When dawn rose over the carnage, he alone stood among corpses, his armor drenched in red. It was from that day that he earned the crimson plating that would become his symbol. Soldiers began to whisper of him as the Red Knight, a man who did not retreat, who stood like a wall of iron against all who opposed him. In the years that followed, Igris rose swiftly. He commanded a battalion of knights who swore unshakable loyalty. They said, "As long as Igris stands, no line shall break." His presence alone steadied soldiers in the chaos of war. He laughed little, spoke rarely, but when he raised his sword, men found courage. Yet no glory is free of shadow. The kingdom he served grew greedy, its kings lusting for more land, more gold, more power. Igris saw villages burn not to protect but to conquer. He obeyed his oaths, yet within him stirred unease. Was his sword protecting the innocent or serving tyranny? Still, he fought, for his men depended on him, and abandoning them was unthinkable. Then came the war that would seal his fate. The kingdom marched against an empire unlike any other, an empire whispered to be under the blessing of beings not human at all. They called them monarchs, creatures of darkness and flame, lords of powers beyond mortal reach. The king, blinded by ambition, dismissed the warnings. He ordered Igris and thousands of men to march. The first clash was beyond nightmare. Soldiers met shadows that devoured steel. Fire fell from the sky, creatures moved with unnatural speed, and human courage broke like glass. But Igris did not break. His battalion, inspired by his unyielding stance, held the line longer than any others. Again and again he swung his greatsword, cutting down monsters no mortal should touch. But the tide was merciless. His men died screaming around him. His crimson armor shattered piece by piece, his blood soaking the earth. Yet Igris refused to kneel. He planted his sword into the ground, holding himself upright when even his legs faltered. When finally his body gave way, he died not on his knees but standing, sword in hand, eyes still blazing. The monarch who witnessed this was stirred. Never before had a mortal resisted so fiercely, so stubbornly. Death should have claimed him, but instead the monarch extended a cruel mercy. His soul was pulled back from the brink, shackled in chains of shadow. His armor was reforged into eternal crimson, his sword into a weapon of endless death. The man named Aelius Igris was no more. He awoke as the blood-red commander, silent, stripped of his name and voice. His humanity was gone, but fragments of memory clung to him like ash to flame. He became a guardian of the eternal dungeon, a sentinel bound to test those who dared enter. His movements were precise, his presence suffocating, his silence louder than war cries. Adventurers who challenged him fell like wheat before the scythe, and stories of the crimson night spread as warnings. Yet deep within that hollow armor, a flicker of the night remained. He remembered standing before raiders with nothing but a stick. He remembered comrades who swore to fight beside him. He remembered a promise, whispered to himself long ago, that he would never bow to darkness. For centuries he stood in silence, a shadow bound in duty. Until one day a new master arrived. A hunter unlike any he had faced, a man whose shadows rivaled the monarchs themselves, Sung Jinwoo. When Jinwoo's power reached for him, the flicker within Igris stirred. He did not resist. He answered, not as a monster conquered, but as a knight who had found a lord worth serving. The world trembled when Igris knelt, not because a monster had been tamed, but because a knight who had never surrendered had found his purpose again. The blood-red commander was not just a shadow. He was the echo of Sir Aelius Igris, the knight who stood to the end.